Welcome to the IRONMAN Insider presented by Maurten. I am your host, Matt Lieto, and I am pumped to start this year off with a first podcast of the season. And a highlight of my 2024, no doubt, was starting this podcast and all the great conversations that came within it. And I can't tell you how excited I am for this new year and everything that this podcast is certainly going to bring. But no better way to start it off than one of the GOATs, greatest of all time in the sport. And I always embarrass him a little bit when I say this, but like, honestly, one of the best people in the sport too. When he retired, it wasn't like us just like losing one of the best of the sport. I was like, man, Craig's just a good dude. So we hated losing him there, but we got him back today. What's going on, man?
Not a lot, mate. That's a very nice intro. Thank you. And yeah, looking forward to having a little chin wag today.
There you go. And Craig paid good money for that intro. So we won't, we
Checks
won't
in the mail.
Awesome. Also funny, you know, I normally don't have this thing up behind me. I clear it out and I forgot, but I felt it apt to leave it because like clearly that's a drawing of you like winning a world championship. And this is a drawing of me running up a hill with the hamburger in my mouth.
I like your drawing better, to be honest. But yeah, no, it's a little sketch that, well, there was a guy back in the day, you probably remember him. He used to sketch a lot of the athletes and then get them printed off. So, mate, I hung that just for you. I thought you'd like it.
Appreciate that. This one, actually, you know, you raced Conrad Stoltz in the ITU days, probably.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Yep. And a lot in the US too. He was on the non-drafting circuit in the US for a long time.
Yeah. We used to train. He was in Bend for a little bit, and we were competitive in eating. And we developed this contest. There's a place behind me. There's a little butte in town that's like, 500 feet tall. And they have this burger that's an 18-ounce patty, and the whole burger weighs 3 pounds. And it's shaped to look like the butte. And we're like, you know what? And if you ate the burger, you got your picture on the wall for like ever, right? And we came up with a contest where you'd eat the burger, a large fries, and a whole milkshake with like the extra like tin. And the first one at the top won, and it was the most painful thing ever. And somehow I got in the cover of the local magazine in a caricature.
You must be a good eater, because I'm tipping Conrad can put away a few of those burgers.
No, he was no match for me. No match at all. Speaking of putting down good food, how was the holidays, man?
It's been good. Yeah, it's always a fun time of year. Of course, down here in our part of the world, it's summer, so
yeah.
a lot of beach time, a little bit of surfing with the kids. Yeah, just catching up with friends and family. It's been awesome. How about you?
Yeah, it was good. Nice and chill. I was in Topah with you, not too far, but before the holidays, so it was kind of get home and try to reacclimate to. I was just in summer, now I'm in winter again, and chill out a little bit. So it was good. It was sweet. And I feel like, and I hate doing this. I don't hate doing this. I'm going to enjoy doing this. But the fact that we have to do this, we were just, before we started recording, talking about how old we are. I feel like I got to re-educate people just in case on the legend that is Craig Alexander. Like, who's this dude that's on the podcast if they haven't been, in the triathlon scene for a little bit. But dude won 3 Ironman World Championships.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Two 70.3 World Championships.
Yep.
And I saw a bronze medal in an aquathon world championship.
The highlight, the pinnacle. Yeah, no, I raced short course for a long time, like most people did. So yeah, did the ITU thing, and predominantly most of my short course racing was in the US, where I raced Conrad and guys like Simon Lessing, Craig Walton, Greg Bennett, Hamish Carter, Whitfield, your brother. Back in the 2000s, that was a very lucrative circuit and just a super competitive circuit. So, but yeah, the bronze medal at the Aquathon Worlds, taking pride of place on the mantelpiece.
Yeah, I got top 10 in that one, so I was pretty proud about that. But I think there was like 11 starters. But yeah, man, and I'm glad we brought up the short course too, because do you think it's funny? I mean, memory in triathlon is short always, right? Like micro short. Like people will forget who the world champion was like a year ago, or if they skip a year, they'll be like, oh, they're not even going to finish. You're like, dude, they won the last time they were there, type of thing. But people think, and don't get me wrong, these athletes that are coming over and winning Ironman distance off of short course careers now are crazy impressive. But people are kind of acting like it's never happened before. And you kind of came straight from short course to a second place in Kona, your debut, yeah?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, and I think it wasn't that unusual. I feel there's definitely more depth these days, but I guess back in our days, which wasn't that long ago, you would race all the distances in a season. I mean, that first year that I raced in Kona, I think I raced 13 times that year, and they were all Olympic distance or halves, really, until Kona. So I think that's just the way the sport was structured back then. Sort of the triathlon landscape was most people did that. So and I think it's the natural pathway to take. I mean, I guess there's a few who. I mean, there's no set path. I mean, someone like Sam Laidlow has had no interest in short course. He's come straight into sort of Ironman racing, but I think he would be a force. I mean, we see him in some of the middle distance races. He wins. So he's definitely got the speed there. And in the end, as an athlete, you just follow your passion or whatever the race you've seen that's inspired you. But yeah, I think there's no one, I guess, set pathway to get to wherever you want to go. But certainly, names like McKeely Jones, Mark Allen, Greg Welsh, they all did short course. I mean, ITU racing, and then predominantly someone like McKeely just raced for a decade on the short course circuit in the US, races like Chicago and St. Croix, Lifetime Fitness, all of those races. So, but you're right. I just think, with social media now, and I think recency bias is a real thing. We have such a short attention span, all of us, that, I mean, I would consider myself sort of a student of the sport, and with so much information coming in at each race, and then you move on to the next race, you do tend to forget what happened even a couple of seasons ago. I think I know you and I were at a lot of the races, and a lot of the contenders, they're not new to the sport. They might be new to Ironman racing, but they're certainly not new to the sport of triathlon. They're seasoned pros.
Yeah, no, I love. I've not heard recency biased before, and that's 100% accurate. Yeah, that's perfect. And yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like, you bring up Sam Laidlow, and I think the whole point is, like, to win an Ironman World Championship, you have to have speed. Right. And wherever you get it, right. And maybe guys in the past, like a Hellriegel, or those guys, got the speed just from being like nails and doing 35 hours of training a week and like never slowing down. But it's funny that you say that, and you're right, that Sam hasn't really done short course racing, but he has short course speed. Like, that dude is fast as, right. So like, you've got to have that top end to be able to compete over that distance, no matter which way you get it.
Oh, 100%. I mean, we saw him go head to head with a couple of the guys who had decorated ITU careers, like Maurten Van Riel and Yellow Geens. I mean, Sam went toe to toe, particularly with Maurten in quite a few races this year. So, I think it's, racing at any distance is not just about covering the distance; it's about how fast you cover the distance. So, threshold and raising the ceiling is always important.
Yeah. Totally. And it's crazy looking at the watts, and I want to talk in a little bit about kind of how things have changed, but the numbers that the women and men are pushing now are crazy stuff, not stuff that, at least, that I wasn't doing from before. But before we get into that, what's if you reminisce and you look back, what were your favorite memories in Ironman distance racing for yourself, or battles?
Every Ironman race was a good memory, because it was just a different challenge, and I never felt that I had all the answers. You knew you were going to get challenged by not only your competitors, but also the conditions, particularly in a race like Hawaii. It's notorious for being hot, humid, windy, and then you throw in the best athletes in the world. So but of course the world championship victories are fond memories. I mean, racing your brother, that one or two seasons, he and I just had battles in every race we did. And I think a good rivalry is one that's exciting to be a part of, and it's one that makes you I guess, reflect on yourself as an athlete and maybe change and evolve
Yeah.
as an athlete. I know when Chris was racing and he was at sort of at the peak of his career, I changed my strategy a little bit and tried to race differently. And I think some of my best performances were against Chris, certainly some of the most painful. I remember having a sprint finish with him in Boise one year in a 70.3. And then the next year I raced him again and it was completely different conditions. The first year it had been cold and wet. The
Yeah.
next year was very, very, very hot as it can get there. And I just thought, I'm just going to ride with Chris, whatever happens today.
Yeah.
And it took him about 20 miles to catch me. And then I rode with him for the last 36 miles. And it was a very hot day. We were rolling through aid stations that hadn't even been set up. Some of them hadn't been set up. So we weren't getting too much nutrition. And we got off the bike together. I think it was the only time in my career I got off the bike with Chris. And we had like a 5-minute lead on the rest of the field. And
Yeah.
I just racked my bike and thought, oh, he's got me today. I think I'm cooked. And I was cooked. And literally 10 steps into the half marathon, Chris just looked at me and said, oh, I'm done. And he sat in the gutter. And I thought, oh, well, I guess I'm in the lead now. I've got to keep going. And it was, I want to say, one of the most painful races I've ever done. And I actually nearly got caught. I think it was Ben Hoffman who came from like 5 or 6 minutes back. And I'm not sure how, yeah, he wasn't too far behind. But, you know, so I think what Chris dragged out of me that day was a performance different to my usual MO. I would normally swim, want to be the first 2 or 3 out of the water, be in the front group as such. But, you know, there were certain guys who you knew were just going to take off and vapor trail up the road. I always rode, not within myself, but at a level where I felt I could run a really solid half marathon or marathon. Whereas that day, and a couple of times I raced Chris, I just threw caution to the wind, and it was exciting. It was actually fun to do, to change your strategy up, mix things up a little.
No, and you definitely brought the best out of him. And what you don't know is that actually that I have 2 favorite Crowley stories, and I might tell both of them today. But one of them is from that race, and I'm sure you don't remember, but I was there and I was racing, and me and Chris were in the same team kit, like Trek K Swiss kit, and I knew you guys were up front. And I was just as confused as you were. I was like, what the heck? I'm like, I can't catch Crowley. Not that like you're easy to catch, but I was like, normally, like, you know, we find ourselves together at some point. And I get off the bike in third and behind Hoffman, and I'm running, and like Chris was in the gutter, as you said. Like he made his way a little bit further, and I like went to stop for a second to like see if he was okay, and he told me to keep going. And we were in the same kit, so we're on this out and back section, and you have your full game face, and you're just looking forward, nothing, and no, you see me and nothing, and then you do like a quick one and another quick one, and then you realize it's me, and you're like, go back, come on, you got it. Like you were gonna give Chris nothing, and you were all happy about me being in third. It was great.
Oh, come on, man, that's mental warfare. You know how it goes.
100%. It was amazing. It was great. But yeah, no, you definitely brought the best out of him, and you won 5 world championships, and I think you beat him for second in 2 of those. So, but I think so you fondly when it comes to those. Yeah, awesome stuff. Any other war stories you want to talk about before we get to the goods?
There's 1,000 war stories, but yeah, let's move on. Let's do
it. You've got it. So, and maybe some more stories will come up in this, but the sport is changing, and it's also hard. Like for me, it's easy to watch it change because like I never accomplished anything in the sport, and it's like whatever. Watching these guys do great stuff is crazy, but I'm sure when you're like at the top, and I don't use the word one of the GOATs easily or lightly. Like you certainly are, and we always change that. Again, recency biased. That the GOAT changes every couple years, right? Frodo, I think, was the last GOAT. Obviously Daniela Reef is one of the GOATs as well. But the times are crazy. So what do you think? Is this as someone that was at the top, you're like, yeah, man, I'd be doing those times if it was if I was racing now. It's just equipment, or what do you think the equation is on? Are these athletes getting faster, or is it just times are passing?
I think it's a bit of everything. I think it's all of those things. I mean, to your first point, do I think I would be competitive? I think that's just the nature of being a competitive person.
Right.
You know, a mountaineer never sees a mountain he doesn't want to climb. So as a competitive athlete, you know, I always used to love the challenge of coming up against the best people over all the distances. I prided myself on being a versatile athlete and being competitive wherever I chose to race. I think one of the talents I had was I was able to train and prepare specifically for whatever the demands of an upcoming race were, whether it was short, long, middle, hot, cold, hilly, flat, whatever. So, but I do have a theory. I feel every sort of generation does get a little better.
Yeah.
I think that happens in a lot of sports, and part of it is the equipment, no doubt. I mean, I look at, you know, the times that the athletes are putting out. I sort of take a deeper dive into sort of their effort and their output, watts per kilo, the paces that are being run, heart rates, and those sorts of things. And you know, I think a great athlete in any era would be a great athlete because they share a lot of those sort of characteristics or traits that people at that level have, which is a discipline, a drive, a motivation, a resilience to keep just coming back. And I think you see that with all the great athletes, male and female in our sports. All the great champions sort of share those traits.
If you're going to strive to get to the top, you're going to strive to get to the top no matter what generation you happen to be in.
Yeah. I think so. You just have different tools at your disposal and different knowledge. I think the knowledge, I definitely think the athletes are getting faster. Let's forget the equipment. I think we look at people, let's talk about the Norwegian method. I don't know if it's a method as such. You have a group, which has been disrupted recently because new coaches, sure. I mean, Olav's moved on, new coaches moved in, but sort of the core of that team, which is Christian and Gustav, I think they're athletes who like to push the boundaries with performance, their training methods, nutrition, how many grams of carbs per hour they can take, all of those things. They're continually teetering right on the edge of what's possible and pushing. So I think they exhibit those sort of traits of trying to progress the sport. They certainly have great tools at their disposal. I mean, we look at the bikes, the setups. I mean, it was interesting, you and I, and I think Welsh and Rinny in when we were in New Zealand for the 70.3 Worlds recently, we were talking about how, you know, that road there is known for being a rough chip seal road. And, you know, even maybe 10 or 15 years ago, you might turn up there with a setup that was 19 or 21 mil tires, 130 psi pressure, and now, 100%. Yeah. You know, you've got Taylor racing on 30 mil rims and tires at 65 psi. So I just think I'm in awe of. I just think there's so many more boxes for the athletes to check. So it makes it easier and harder. It's easier from the perspective you may have more tools at your disposal, but I think it's harder that you just have to be across a lot more in terms of your nutrition, your equipment. There's so many more boxes to check. I mean, these athletes are in the wind tunnel a couple of times a year, on the velodrome, fine-tuning position, equipment choices. And I guess the end result, it leads to faster times, but it's a lot more work as well. So, I think it's a mix of all of those things.
And it feels more like a full-time job than it did before. And it felt like one then, but, you know, recovery and doing that is a thing. Now the athletes have social media they also have to be on top of. You know, they've got to create their brand. They got to do all that stuff, as well as, you know, finding all these stones to turn over and see what's inside. And we're not even talking about you know, I had Dr. David Spindler on the podcast a bit ago, and, you know, we're talking about these athletes with neuroscientists trying to get them to get the most out of, you know, themselves. And again, not talking about mental coaching or you know, any of that. It's very specific neural pathway work. And that's something we didn't even know. I mean, I didn't know that stuff existed 2 years ago, you know?
Yeah, it's crazy, you know, because I think for a long time it was just mostly about the training and your fitness and your physiology. And we always knew psychology and mindset was important, but sort of neuroscience was something that was a pipe dream or something you would often, you might read about, but sort of have no way to tap into or access. And I certainly know with aerodynamics, you know, you and I raced through that era where a lot of, particularly the bike companies, started producing their super bikes and the the non-UCI legal, time trial specific, very aerodynamic bikes. So we sort of touched at the start of it.
Yeah.
And even before that, we knew about the benefits of aerodynamics, but I don't think companies were able to manufacture the products with carbon technology the way they can now. And so many things have changed, but it's all for the better. I mean, I love turning up to these races like we do now and just thinking, gee, I wonder what's going to happen today.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I mean, to your point, like, and I'm sure you got in the wind tunnel eventually, but, and no disrespect to my brother and his ability. Obviously he was a great cyclist, but he was like the only triathlete to be in a wind tunnel for a lot of that period. And I was doing like wind tunnel testing with pictures, and me and my buddy were like drawing over in graph paper what we thought the wind was going to be doing. Right.
Yeah.
Like that's how we got aerodynamic. But yeah, it's insane. And looking at the times, and, you know, you bring up Topa, and only bringing up the men's result because that's a rounder number, but the dude who won is a runner, thought of as a runner, rode a 159. Like, that's crazy. That's crazy. Like, Clearwater days, I remember, I don't want to talk about my brother all day here, but like, we decided, like, one year he's like, I'm going to try to break 2 hours.
Yeah.
And I think he did. And then his body didn't function as a human body when he got off the bike. He was like, couldn't move, you know? Like, and now it's just the thing.
No, it's incredible. I mean, Yellow Geens, yes, it's funny how we pigeonhole someone as a runner, but I guess to win those races, you've just got to be a great all-round triathlete. You can't have any weaknesses, and you never could really. You really needed to have the complete game. The race finishes with a run though, so I mean, whichever way you slice and dice it, you need to be able to finish off put a big exclamation point on your race, and that's how you do it. But I mean, I would have loved to have seen what your brother was putting out back in those days though, because I mean, even I know the race kits we had that were just flopping around with zippers, and I mean, I do think the athletes these days get a lot more bang for their buck in terms of their coefficients of drag and things like that. So,
sure.
But it's a new era, and I'm loving it. I'm loving the competitiveness, the depth. I'm loving on the women's side just watching, you know, every sort of generation has their outlier who changes the dynamic, and it's been interesting to watch Taylor Knibb the last 2 or 3 years. I think we were saying that she's won 370.3 world titles in a row, equaling Danny's record. So we had seen it before, but it's forcing the other girls to sort of up their game and reinvent themselves or evolve as athletes. And for me, that's the interesting thing. That's, as we go from season to season, watching these narratives develop around, okay, we've got a standout champion here. The ball's in the court of the rest of the ladies. How are they going to respond? And I think we saw Kat Matthews step up in Topor. We saw Ash Gentle step up in a couple of races this year. So for me, that's the exciting thing. It's not just who's winning, it's how they're winning and how these races are playing out. But certainly you referenced, the bike splits in Topor. It was unbelievable, the speeds those guys were riding along at. And that group, it started as a big-ish group out of the water, the way it always has. I mean,
yeah, sure.
I think in men's racing, it's been super competitive out of the water. You've always had a bigger group, but that selection, that group just got smaller and smaller. I think there were 7 or 8 of them at the end. And then we saw Hayden do that beautiful little tactical descent in a town to steal 15 seconds. And it's exciting racing.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. And, both sides, obviously. And I think the scary thing, and maybe what's a little different about Taylor Knibb, and I might be wrong, but I don't think I am. Like, you talk about McKeely Jones, and she had this long career, and then she won an Ironman, and she won one Ironman World Championship, and obviously it was quite impressive, but she wasn't this like force that was around. We're like, Taylor's young, dude. If I'm one of those women, I'm like, and to your point, the only option is to either like just say I'm not going to be a champion, or like freaking get to work and find a way to like be the person that's going to do it. And I think you tell me, I think the difficult part with that though is, and Laura Phillip obviously showed that she has the ability to do that as well, obviously in Nice. But I find that when you have a transcendent athlete, and I don't know if you ever had to race someone in your career at that time where you were like, they're unbeatable. Maybe Bennett was when you first started. I don't know, but it's the only, like, if any of those women, and I'm going to get emails from this, like try to beat Taylor and go outside of themselves and beat Taylor, like catch her on the bike and beat you, like they then risk not finishing the race. Where often the way to win when that transcendent athlete is there is like, you just need to make sure you're in second place. And when something happens, you're the one that like mops it up, right? When there's that big a gap. And yeah, what do you think about that? Like, where are the women at these days?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. And I mean, for me, I guess the guy who was hard to beat, particularly in the Olympic distance non-drafting, was Craig Walton. He was the guy who I finished second to him in Noosa. I finished second to him in Chicago. One of the best races I ever had, actually, was the LA Triathlon in 2002. I finished second behind Craig Walton. And there were 5 ITU world champions in that race who were behind me. But I was still over a minute behind Craig Walton. So
right.
I think every athlete, you come up against someone who is your Everest. And I think it's interesting because you can spend a lot of time looking at them, and you need to. We can learn a lot from modeling behavior and looking at who's the gold standard, what's their level, and you need to aspire to get there and be motivated to do it. In the end, though, you need to keep chipping away at your own game and try and narrow the gap. But then at some point, when you're in the ballpark, you do need to take a few risks with your strategy, mix things up a little bit. I was never one to sort of just hang around and wait for them to drop their level. I always felt the onus was on me to lift my level.
Sure.
I'm not just going to wait for them to be off the boil a little bit and pick up the pieces or mop up the dregs, so to speak. I always felt that was part of the challenge. And I think it's interesting. It's you need people like that in your career to get the most out of yourself. So Taylor's just amazing. You mentioned before there's been some athletes who have been successful. Well, there's been a lot of athletes who have been successful across all distances, because as we talked about, it's all triathlon. Each distance has its nuance, but if you've got enough good people around you, you can figure it out. I think a couple of the things that we've seen recently that maybe we've never seen was, Taylor is a classic example. She's at the Olympic Games, mixing it up in that mixed team relay. One of the greatest anchor legs. I mean, that mixed team relay at the Olympics was awesome.
Yeah.
Got, not single-handedly, but her anchor leg, sort of put an exclamation point on a silver medal for the US team. Next thing you know, she's in the cycling races at the Olympics, and then fast forward a month or two, she's in middle distance and then 70.3 world championships. So not just making up the numbers, being a contender. So she's, and we saw it a couple of years ago. She did it in Kona. She went from short course to 70.3, and then her debut on the Big Island, she finished third. And we saw it on the men's side with Christian. I mean, he finished third in Kona a couple of years ago. I want to say, was it two weeks later, we were in Utah at St. George, and he won 70.3 worlds. And then a week after that, he got a second place at an ITU sprint race in his hometown of Bergen. I mean, we've seen athletes bounce between distances. We've just never seen them do it in the same month or even in the same season. I mean, it's kind of unprecedented, really.
Totally. I think the only athlete I can think of my era that seemed to do that was like when Terenzo got on a bender,
Yeah.
He was kind of unstoppable for 2 months at a time. But no, I think you're totally right. And the maybe the scary thing with Taylor is that she hasn't found what she's best at yet. Probably it might be the 70.3 distance, but like there's zero chance you could say that she's found the thing that she's best at yet, and that's probably pretty scary. But what drives Taylor, and I think sometimes she doesn't get credit for this until you're like in a room talking to her about it, is that because she is so like detail oriented, and like I think some people think she's just like robotic in some ways and like just does the thing. She's doing all these things because she freaking loves it. Like she loves it. She's doing it because she's like, dude, doing the time trial at the Olympics sounds sweet. I want to do it.
And I mean, I think that's a common trait amongst, outliers and high performers in all arenas of life, is they have a passion and a love. It can be work as well, but first and foremost, it's an intrigue, a curiosity, and a passion to do things. And she's a breath of fresh air in the sport. I love her quirkiness in her interviews and just how authentic she is. And I love that she's over in New Zealand racing the Worlds at the end of a incredibly long season. I mean, our professional athletes race long seasons these days, and she's just sort of on a road trip with her mum and dad. Her mum's racing as well,
Yeah.
and kind of just reminds us all that it is still about just passion and love. You're doing something that you like to do. It's a recreation, it's a sport, and it should be fun. And she seems to be having a lot of fun with it.
No, she is, and it's it's awesome. Awesome to see. Always fun to. Her mom's great, and she's always like down for a chat. And yeah, she's obviously been brought up the right way, which is sweet to see. Okay, and I want to get on to asking you some input that our age groupers can use here, maybe building into the next year. But I'd be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about Kona and kind of how crazy that race was. And I want to hear what stood out most to you. I think for me, it kind of like the perspective was changed when like I got really excited. If anybody watched the race, I got really excited when Werf was running through the field. It was like hilarious because like I know like it's just the opposite as what is supposed to happen, and it was like he was a monster, and he was like he was sprinting through everybody, and he had I think he faded a little bit, but he ran his way into a good position. I think 6th or 7th place.
7th,
and yeah, and he was just the run that he's always wanted, right? And after the race, I go up. He was actually up in my room talking to Spindler, and I was like, man, was it one of those days where like I think you've probably had them, I've had them, where like the bike wasn't there, and then for whatever reason your body just didn't have it, so you couldn't ride. But then I was like, oh, best run of my life. Some of the best races I've had, I like had nothing on the bike, even though I was trying. And I was like, man, was it one of those days? And because like I thought he was the last man on the planet on the bike. Like I was back, like picking up garbage that somebody dropped, on the moto. And I was like, oh, there's Cam. And he's like, mate, I rode a 403. And I was like, what? He rode a 403, swam a 52, and looked like he was like a total write-off. And that's how crazy that race was to me.
It was an incredible race to watch. I think it speaks to a few things. Firstly, that's why you can never give up. If the ace that you normally play is not there, you never know how things. I mean, we saw it with Magnus Ditlev as well. I mean, who would have thought that he would get off the bike 7th and run up into 2nd?
Dude, in transition, he was dead man walking. Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's just one of those races you just never know. And I think the guys and the girls are pushing the limits so much now that blow-ups are only ever just around the corner, more so than ever. And everyone talks about wanting fast conditions in Kona, and we want fast times. And I want to say it was really good conditions this year. I mean, of course, the pros, they start 40 minutes earlier than the age groups now, and then when it used to be a mass start, the gun went off at 7. So I think that speaks to a little bit that in the swim and the bike they get more favourable conditions. But favourable doesn't mean easy. Favourable means you push hard, and we saw them push super hard. Maybe it wasn't quite as hot because they were out a bit earlier, and definitely not as windy, but they were going at it. Magnus definitely tried to bridge up to Sam, couldn't do it. There was just, it was just like a bomb detonated on that bike ride on the way back from Harvey. But yeah, Cam's interesting because when you're watching the race and you're trying to stay across all the guys and girls, you just sometimes you lose track of one or two athletes, and he's one of those ones you kind of lose track on because he's always so far behind out of the swim. He's sort of just on the edge of the radar, but you're never quite paying attention. But he had an incredible race. I mean, I think it speaks to his professionalism, his commitment, and his improvement over the last 5 or 8 years, that he just continues to improve, and incredible performance. But I think we saw that the way they biked definitely impacted the run. I mean, only Patrick ran under 240. I think 246 or 247 was Magnus, who got the second place on the podium, and Rudy with a 248 rounded out the podium. So I think those times are probably a touch slower than those boys would normally run, for sure. But totally. it's a triathlon, you know, when you spend the energy early, sometimes you don't have it late. But yeah, no, it makes for interesting racing. One guy I want to mention who I thought was certainly in the frame for a huge performance was Trevor Foley. You know, he was in that Camworth group coming in off the bike, and I happened to be standing probably an eighth of a mile from the dismount line, and he just had an unfortunate crash. He was swinging his leg off the bike, his shoe got caught, clipped the road, and he sort of just cartwheeled forward.
It was gnarly. I saw a video of it. Yeah.
Terrible crash. I happened to be right there. I helped pick him up, and I mean, he's a great runner. He's a great runner. So he'd had a great race, and he's had a great sort of trajectory. His career's been on a good trajectory. So I'm excited to watch how he goes. But yeah, my heart just broke for him. I mean, he was in such a great position, and to have that happen, just terrible.
And that was hard. And I normally don't do this, but like he was in transition, and like, you know, I got the camera and we're like going over there, and I'm like, nah, man, like it was just too heartbreaking to like where he was at. And you could tell like literally a quarter mile before he's like, I'm going to have a chance at a podium at this race. And then he's on his back. Like it was gnarly. And yeah, I mean, all your points on that, I think are spot on. I think what's crazy though, and speaks to how things are tightening, is all those athletes, I think they have to be in that front group. So like, that's why you have these big explosions. Like that group just absolutely detonated.
Yeah.
But you had I still think that you can do it without being in there. And I think a lot of those guys made some errors by staying in it. And you look at Leon Chevalier, that dude was by himself all day long, like 100% all day long. Yeah. And he was pretty close to getting second place, just mistimed an aid station and got hot in a situation. And who knows if that would have affected it or not, but like, I believe it could have. Yeah. You know, he was impressive. And then just that tightening, like, again, Worf swam a 52. Like back in the day, a guy that we'd look at as like a Worf, like you know, he loses too much time in the swim, he rides well, like that was like a 58 back then, right? So it's like
the field's compressed. The field's compressed.
Crazy.
It's crazy. The level, the depth is crazy. But you're right though. I think it speaks to a couple. Leon could have easily got second or third, and he ended up fourth, which is still, and it was one of the performances of the day. Yeah, he was a long way back, rode amazing, ran exceptionally well, and really when you think of it, I mean, Patrick's run was incredible, but really a lot of the other boys, you know, I guess if I'm in their position, you could look back and I mean, hindsight's a wonderful thing, and really the only purpose it serves is to learn some lessons and move forward. It's not like you can sit back and say, I should have done this or I should have done that. But if you're doing an honest self-analysis of your race, and you were someone who finished in the top 5 or top 10 there, you could look at those results and say, well, there's areas clearly I could improve. You know, certainly the lower wind helped Patrick a lot. I think it helped him stay in that group. Not to say there was drafting there, but I think on a day where there's no winds, especially those crosswinds on the back half of the course, it's much more likely that group's going to stay together, and that group it moves as sort of one, almost as a vacuum. So I think Patrick knew that the kind of fitness he had, and he had the discipline and the experience to say, well, especially once he got to Harvey, it was like, I mean, he's one guy who's in the box seat. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say for a second that when they made the turn at Harvey, I predicted that he would win and win by the distance he won by. But I thought, man, he's in a very good position in this race, because let's say he loses 5 minutes on the way back to town. He's probably going to run a 2:38, somewhere around that, which means he's in the hunt. Totally.
And my argument would be, and not against you at all, but like if he loses those 5 minutes, Patrick's been around long enough where he's going to take himself out of that group and be like, okay, right? And I think the only thing that noticed from being out there on the moto, sitting back and watching, was that dude, like people are like, oh, Patrick sat in the group. That dude got spat out the back of that group so many times and clawed his way back so many times. And there were, I don't know, 5 or 6 dudes that slowly like got dropped off. Like Patrick, I was watching or reading something the other day that he said that was like his day, that the best day he's ever had in triathlon. And I wouldn't disagree, because
it was a masterclass.
It's crazy.
It was, it's amazing.
You went 8:03 and we were mind blown.
Yeah, I mean, it was incredible to watch. Again, though, when you get athletes like Christian and Sam Laidlow and Patrick, they pushed the envelope. I mean, Sam set that race up. He was all about not just blowing the rest of the field up. I think just testing his own limits. Those things are different. I think he, I read somewhere after the race, people said it was a crazy bike ride. Again, in hindsight, it is, but to do crazy times like 7:36, you've almost got to have a crazy strategy sometimes that everyone else looks at and says, "Oh, that's crazy," until it actually works.
Totally, but that's crazy until if you look at it, he then has to. If he ran a 2:40, he would have had to run a 2:44 to still beat Patrick. So it's like it's what he would have had to do to win that race.
100%, 100%. And you know what? Let's play a fun little game where we say, let's say he rode 3 minutes slower. Yeah. He probably would have run a lot quicker. Does he beat Patrick? Who knows? He's trying to win. He's not just trying to get a gallant podium. So in the heat of the moment, you make those decisions. But you're right about Patrick. There were times he was 100 meters off the back of that group. But it showed his experience, and he didn't panic. He just stayed right on his sort of his power and his pacing sort of governor that he'd set for himself, and kept things really steady and was able to ride back onto the back of that group and multiple times. So yeah, it just showed his experience. Yeah, it was a great performance.
No, that's sweet. So yeah, real quickly, I'd be remiss to not ask you about kind of Pro Series this year and kind of impressions. And I know I was stoked to see an athlete like Barnaby, that's kind of breakthrough athlete, have the season that he did. And mostly I was excited because you're like you talked to him and he's like, I never thought he still kind of before Topol didn't think he was a great athlete or like that he had the ability to be one of the best. And it's like, no, man, like you gotta change that now. Like it says that champion next to your name now. So there's no going back.
Yeah. I love the Pro Series. I think it added a different sort of layer of interest to the racing this year. Yeah. Particularly in Topol, we had a situation where we had a race within a race as well. Yeah. So, I think the athletes had crunched the numbers. They knew sort of the times they had and who they had to be around. Obviously on the women's side, Kat was just trying to win a world title. But on the men's side, I think we saw, athletes doing their sums, working out where they needed to finish, who they needed to beat. And it was great. It rewards consistency. I know I was in Busselton at the 20th anniversary of that race, Ironman Western Australia, and for the Ironman Pro Series, it was the 70.3 Asia Pacific Championships, and Greg, he won that race, and I was interviewing him after. He was over the moon. He said it was his first big, real breakthrough victory, and it sort of solidified his position in the Pro Series. Gave him a lot of confidence heading to New Zealand. And I think you love to see athletes like that. Just a nice guy, but a great athlete, breakthrough, sort of level his performance up, get that belief in himself. And that'll change his career, I think, from a lot of perspectives. Like, I guess we can say the money will make things easier for him, but hopefully it'll give him a lot of confidence. I think that's the main change it'll give him a sort of a self-belief that he belongs at the front end of the big races. And I mean, his race in Topol was great. His race in Busselton was amazing. He swam with guys like Mark DeBrick and those, the really top swimmers. Again, they rode 157 over in Busselton it's a fast course, it's flat, but it was a windy day and it's an incredible bike ride, and closed it out with a 112 run. I mean, his time was in the 330s, just incredible. So it was great to see him win the Pro Series. And Kat was just Kat. She did what she always does, which is show up on any day, any conditions, and just be competitive.
That's the thing, and I certainly don't mean to like diminish Kat at all. But like, we always knew it was going to be Kat. Like I knew, as soon as it was announced, I was like, if Kat's doing the series, she's winning the series, right?
She's so consistent.
Totally. And I shouldn't say that because it's like it diminishes maybe how impressive she is, but she did not leave many points on the board at all. Just a few, obviously, in Nice, and then 70.3, it was like a minute and a half or something of one of hers earlier in the year. So, I mean, that athlete is crazy. And I want to ask your, opinion on, I feel like we're at a spot right now in the women's racing where we've had a lot of like best, like there's been these streaks of like the GOAT, right? Like we had like the Rennie days, we had the Chrissy days, we had the Daniela days. And right now it's like, you'd say it's almost ready to be Lucy days, but her fragility keeps her out of that, right? So it's like, and obviously Laura Phillip finally got that world championship win over that distance, the Ironman distance. And so maybe that confidence is going to be there. But where do you see right now? Like right now, it's like Kat Taylor hasn't really proven herself over the distance yet, even though she got fourth in Kona a couple years ago. Like, what do you think?
Mate, it's a great question, and I think it's why we keep coming back to watch the races, because I don't have an answer for you. I think you're right. It seemed that the natural successor to Danny was going to be Lucy, but sort of Lucy's had a couple of injury concerns. Still putting together a hell of a resume, no doubt, but yeah, just hasn't been able to be on the start line of some of the bigger races. I mean, normally we would have seen Lucy, I think, at Nice and in Topor this year, and we didn't see her in either. Yeah. It's a good question. Well, let me ask you a question. Okay, sure. If we're looking at the season that just was, I mean, we saw Laura win in Nice. She's the Ironman World Champion. We saw Taylor win in Topor for her. She did the three-peat, throw in an Olympic medal, great middle distance season. But then we've got Kat, who got a silver medal in Nice, a silver medal in Topor, and also won the Ironman Pro Series. So what's the better season there? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I kind of think because it was the first year of the Ironman Pro Series, we mightn't give that the cachet that it deserves. But I kind of feel that Kat's season's been amazing because she's shown she can turn up and do it on the individual day, but she's also shown she can turn up and do it every day for a whole season. And to me, that speaks to, I guess it depends what criteria you use when you're calibrating and assessing these seasons. But I mean, it's a tough one.
Totally. And I mean, I think, and I don't want to compare the men's field and the women's field, but I'm going to, to prove this point, is that Barnaby was 6th at a world championship and 10th, if I'm right? And Kat was a contender and almost won, right? She was second and second and put herself in those positions. So like that is a consistency at the very highest level that I think is remarkable. And yeah, maybe Taylor's 70.3 performances on some of the days, the dominance where you have women being like, I'm not going to race Taylor anymore. Is like that's an argument to have to put in Taylor's.
You can put an argument forward for all of those ladies because I think Taylor's consistency over the years, like 3 70.3 titles in a row, is awesome. That's exactly what we would see Danny do. But Kat's consistency across the years, and then her just consistency this year to be a contender over the different distances was impressive. Yeah, Laura did, I guess, take what you might argue was the main race. I don't know. I think the sport's changing. The landscape's changing a little bit now that 70.3 Worlds has a credibility and a history now. So it's an interesting one. And Lucy, who you mentioned, I mean, I think she would have been a contender at Nice. Definitely would have been a contender in Topor. It's interesting times. On the men's side, Patrick won Kona, finished second in the Pro Series, but I think it's fair to say, and this is not a knock on Patrick, I don't think he would have been in the race in Topor. I don't think he would have had that speed. It's interesting times. I mean, since Christian and Gustav, I think those two gentlemen were clearly the best two triathletes in the world across a lot of distances for 3 or 4 years there, and maybe that has taken a toll on their body. Obviously, Gustav's had other things going on in his life, so it's made it a challenge for him. But it just shows how hard it is to keep turning up year after year and being at the top, like we see Danny retired and she had a 10-year period where she was able to do it year after year. And I think, yeah, it just shows you how hard that is to do.
So perfect segue. I want to spend just a few minutes, and I know you got a day ahead of you, so we'll let you go, but where we can maybe talk about going into a new year. Obviously you're, experienced athlete, but also an Ironman U master coach, and have great experience coaching as well. What's your advice to give athletes, like maybe, obviously North America is still kind of an off season period of time, what to focus on then, and then moving into kind of next year, maybe thoughts on that durability that's physical, but also mental. Like you said, it's a long season, right? Like how would you look at things to set a season up, or again, coming in and off an off season? So that athlete, I know you're excited to try to win your age group in Oceanside, but you're also trying to race in Nice. Like, how do we do that?
Well, let me just stop you right there and say I don't have an important day to get to. There's nothing in my today more important than chatting with you. So, it's a good one. I think it's, as a coach or as an athlete, it's where self-awareness comes into it. You've got to know your personality. For better or worse, we are who we are. And some people want to go full steam ahead 12 months of the year. And maybe with that type of a personality, you need to rein it in a little bit, because whilst they might have a high motivation and a mental drive, you want to make sure their body's durable enough to hang in there for the whole season. I think it comes back to having a good plan. So when you do your debrief on the season that's just passed, looking at the things, did we check off the boxes? Did we meet some of the goals we'd set for ourselves? How did that season play out in terms of our training, our performances? How did it fit in with family life and work life? And so you sort of do that debrief, and you pick out the parts that were really good about the season, and maybe the things you could work on for next season. And like anything, it's about having a good plan. So you plan ahead. Well, what are my goals for next season? And I think when you're talking to athletes about that, or when you're an athlete yourself setting your goals, I think it's important to remember there's no right or wrong answers there. If something's personal and meaningful to you, it'll be a great goal. Right. You want to make them challenging, for sure. Some athletes are trying to win world titles. Some are trying to qualify for world titles. Some are trying to set personal bests. Some are trying to step up in distance. Some are trying to hit performance benchmarks they've never hit before. They're all great goals. Sure. They're all great goals. So be very clear about setting yourself some goals that are challenging, but personal and meaningful to you. And other people might not understand your goals, where you want to race, why you want to race. That's fine. They don't need to. As long as you understand and very clear about what your why is, I think you'll be fine there.
That's great advice.
So that speaks to the mental side of things. I think having a good plan helps mentally. It helps dose your motivation. The physical considerations, another one. Yeah, I think you need to be very careful in your planning. It's something I used to like to train and move for lifestyle as much as. So one of my favorite times of the year was coming off a long season, whether it be the race. My season might have finished with a race in Hawaii. I would take some time off, just catch up with friends, but it always involved movement. I like to go surfing. I like to go mountain bike riding. I like to I would get home to Sydney. I'd been away for 6 months. I'd do coffee shop rides with my buddies. Maybe we would ride 3 miles to the coffee shop, sit there for 2 hours, and then ride 3 miles home. That could be. So there was a period of time, it could be 2 or 3 weeks, where there was some movement, but it was more just for medicine, to keep the body going, and because I enjoyed it. Mentally, I always felt good about the rest of my day when my day started with some exercise. So there'd be no structure to it, though. No performance benchmarks or parameters to hit. It was just moving for the sake of enjoyment. Then I would get into sort of a period that was a little more structured, but not too much more structured. Again, it was just sort of like almost active recovery, but a lot of zone 2 if we want to get technical, sure. And just enjoyment. But just getting I guess you sort of laying or setting the table for what's to come next, which is a more structured training plan to come later. So I guess to answer your question, it's sit down. If you're self-coached, then just make sure you have a good plan, how the next 12 months is going to look. For a lot of age group athletes, their plan might be 12 or even 18 months or 2 years, because they might be trying to qualify for a championship that's a season away. So make sure you're realistic about the time that you've got available to commit to your training and your racing. How that, you might have some races that are bigger races that you're traveling to, but I always used to like to race, so I'd always put in a lot of local races as well in my schedule, because for me that was the fun of it. Wasn't just, I used to love training, but a lot of my enjoyment came from the competitiveness of a race. So, but set yourself some realistic goals, very challenging goals that are personal to you, and then be very organized around your time planning, and understand there are different considerations, the mental and the physical. You can be mentally strong, but you want to make sure your body's durable enough to not break. And sometimes you need a mental rest, and that's okay too. That's not a sign of weakness. I think recognizing and understanding when we need recovery shows experience and strength. No, it's not a show of weakness at all.
Yeah, no, I think that's very, very well said. And I think it goes a little bit on like talking about kind of the joy factor, like a Taylor nib and all that, like keeping things exciting. And but for me, there's part of that, like to add to your point of, kind of being like refilled to a certain extent going into that season. It's always kind of, and I would tell athletes now, and I used to think of, you would have this kind of like invisible bucket of like motivation, and like all year you're just freaking taken out of that thing. And by the time you get to the end of the year, that thing is like bottomless pit. You can't see the bottom of it. And for me, that off season and building into the season, it's like, man, I got to put stuff in there. So if that's me, like not doing anything for a couple weeks and like eating stuff around the holidays and doing that, sure, that's a little bit, but it's that type of training, right? So like you said, mountain biking for me, it might be backcountry skiing or skate skiing, or for me, a huge thing in the off seasons in years past, and I've brought it back in this year, is like yoga for me, like made that body a lot more durable. And I was putting like reserves into that bucket of motivation, because I haven't pulled, like I wouldn't, probably 6 weeks before Oceanside, I would start taking out of that bucket. And before that, I'd just be putting back in, because I'm like, man, that thing's not full enough yet. I got to race till October, like keep that thing going. Right. Like, and whatever that is for each person, I think
that's great advice.
Is important for people to find out,
It's great advice. And I think you mentioned like North America and the Northern Hemisphere is coming into winter. There's a lot of great cross training that sort of masquerades as fun. I know Jackie Herring does snowshoe races, cross country skiing. There's a lot of stuff you can do that's kind of cross training, still working the cardio, but it's not structured, and it can be fun. But mate, you're 100%. It's about recognizing what you need and making sure that bucket's got something in it when you dive into it.
Yeah, and it's not always a sacrifice, right? Like I went skate skiing this morning, and as soon as I step on the snow, my heart rate's 165. Like it's certainly doing something for me. It's just not that repetitive thing, and something that at the end of the year we all come, especially if you're racing after Kona or World Championship, you're like, man, there's always a time where you're like, I do not want to get on my bike, right? So it's like, don't do that then for a little bit, and then when it's time to do so, it's time to do so. But
you're good to go.
Yeah. What do you got on your docket coming up this year? Anything you're excited about?
Got a few things. Got some camps planned. So with the coaching business, that's my main role is to turn up to most of the camps. So we've got a few going on in Mallorca in Spain. We've got a few going on at the Marnolani Resort in Kona on the Big Island, which will be fun, and some in North America, in the US on the East Coast in the Blue Ridge Mountains at the Firstborn properties. So that should be fun. Got a couple of projects at home I'm working on too here in Australia. So and just try to keep this old body moving as well. So that's always high on my agenda.
Yeah, you do a pretty good job of it. I mean, you only officially retired how many years ago?
2019. Yeah, 2020. So
amazing.
Squeezed every drop out of the lemon.
You did, and you were doing a pretty good job of squeezing too. There were some young guys that were like, man, would you just stop? I want to get a paycheck. But that's awesome. Well, I do hope, and I'm sure it'll be the case, that this year we get to cross paths and do a little bit more commentary work with you, because I always enjoy it. And man, I didn't know, and I kind of knew, but I didn't know till today, you're the numbers nerd. You had like everybody's splits and places.
Yeah.
You don't forget.
No. Yeah, I wouldn't say I've got a photographic memory, but if we talk about a split, or I tend not to forget. So, but yeah, I enjoyed the commentary work. It's as you know, I mean, you've done it for a long time and you've done it well. It's a great way to watch the race unfold.
Oh,
And plus, I just love being at all the events. So every opportunity I get to travel to an event, I snap it up. I love it.
it's a great way to watch the race unfold, but stick with your role because, I almost got a bunch of vomit on me in Kona. When,
Yeah, I like to be in the safe. I like to be in the safety of the transition area or somewhere off course where no one can sweat on me or vomit on me.
yeah, when the Norwegians were, projectile vomiting, I was a little bit too close to the action.
That was sensational.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure my producer is going to be excited that we ended the podcast on a vomit note. But, dude, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Well, again, one of my favorite people in the sport, and appreciate you taking the time to sit down and have a chat.
Oh man, I appreciate the invite to come on, and can't wait to see you at the races again this year.
Sweet. Let's do it again. Thanks so much, man.
Take care, mate.
Well, there you go. Craig is always a pleasure to talk to. A lot more of a stat man than I thought he was, but I knew he was a great conversationalist. I hope you guys enjoyed that one. To stay across all the latest Ironman and Ironman Pro Series news, follow Ironman Try on Instagram and check out proseries.ironman.com for standings, athlete bios, episodes of A Fighting Chance, and replays of the races and more. I know we've got a big season coming up this year. Really excited about the Ironman Pro Series and some of the changes going in that. And obviously some different races to focus on and new athletes coming into the Pro Series. Super excited for what is to come there. So keep an eye on that space. And again, need to thank and want to thank our presenting sponsor, Maurten, the official sports performance nutrition partner of the Ironman Global Series, for everything that they do for us and this podcast. We couldn't do it without them. So many, many thanks to Maurten for that. And if you've enjoyed today's conversation, please like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to this podcast. And if you're sitting on the trainer, you can also watch the podcast as a video on our Ironman Triathlon YouTube channel. Thank you again for joining us on the Ironman Insider podcast presented by Maurten. And be sure to keep an eye on this space for more great conversation with the season ahead. I'm Matt Lieto, and thank you so much for tuning in.